Today at Deutsche Auto Parts, we're going to be buttoning up a few final details on our Mark V and putting our intercooler and front end on. So when we left off, we had just dropped our engine into this vehicle and it was coming back to our shop. We're now back here. Max has been working on a lot of final details, little finite things that are buttoning up the details on running all the wiring and getting everything installed for this. So for example, here, this harness would normally come down here, down the frame rail, and then come out over here. He has now run it up into the cowl and it's coming through the fender and out. We also have the other engine harness. All these wires are all buttoned up, and then we have this part of the harness that's actually going to run under the trans instead of over the trans. Again, that's for aesthetics. The fuse box is all mounted up, the shifter is mounted in place. So if we take a look at our valve cover, the wires both for the N75 valve and the diverter valve on the factory car would actually come out past this coil harness and run out the other side. There'd be a hole here. Now this has the red coil harness. This is the Euro harness cover, and that would actually be, you'd have to modify it for factory settings. So there would be a hole here. This one doesn't have it. For aesthetics, because the wastegate's going to be on this side and we're running a manual wastegate along with a manual diverter valve or blow-off valve on this car, we're not going to be using the diverter valve, so we're actually going to run that over here and run a resistor in place for that. And then we have the N75 valve, which controls the wastegate. And we're still going to be using this, but because the wastegate is mounted over here, we're actually going to be mounting that in place somewhere in this general vicinity, but we need to obviously modify the wiring once we figure out where exactly this is going to be mounted on the engine compartment. Now we are actually going to be taking this line and putting a stainless one in place. This is one that was actually given to Max by a buddy of his. We're going to have a solution on this coming pretty soon, along with some option for bleeder block coming soon. So we'll have links that in the description. But essentially what this is a bleeder block goes to the slave cylinder, which is also the throttle bearing. And this is where you would bleed the fluid out. We're actually going to be taking this line and making it stainless. So we're actually going to do so by disconnecting it in the back just for ease of use and access, because there's a union that actually is right below where this motor mount is that actually needs to be cracked loose to swap this line out. So since we've found that it's easier to disconnect it from up here. All right, now we're going to pop this loose here. Now that that's out of place, we can actually swing that up, and so that we can release it on the other side. All right, now we have it loose on the other side. Again, these are kind of just quick locks, and what you see, if you take a look here, that just kind of locks in place in this groove here to prevent it from backing out. And so all we're going to do is kind of give that a wiggle to pop it out. Just keep in mind, there would be brake fluid in this line normally. This thing has obviously been sitting for a long time, all the brake fluid's out of here. But we have found that for this particular setup, it's easiest to do that and then fish this around. And now we're going to be loosening this line here from this hard pipe here. Now that our stainless line's installed, we are ready for race car. Now we are ready to install our accessory bracket. That's going to give us the ability to put our alternator on and then our accessory belt. This car is going to be running no AC. Now we're going to throw our alternator on, and to do so, it mounts on the bracket. It has kind of these bushings. You got to kind of work them in place and then do the same on the top. And once you get the bottom kind of in place, the top will sit there, and you're going to need a hammer to hammer it the rest of the way on. Now that our alternator is mounted in place, we can put our belt tensioner in place, and we have an Allen all set up there to hold tension. Makes it a little bit easier for installation. And then we can get our 13s. Now we have our tensioner assembly tightened in place. We can put our belt on it, and because this is a non-AC car, this is obviously going to go just from the alternator to the crank pulley or the fluid hamper on this particular car. And there's no AC, but there's also no power steering on this car because, like many current model VWs, the Mark V uses electromechanical power steering. So it makes it obviously simple, non-fluid type power steering. And again, obviously routing is super easy on these, and you're all set. Now we are at our oil filter bracket. This is our 1.8T setup. This is where the oil feed line that goes to the turbo would go. And this is our oil pressure switch. Now, for anybody we've had a lot of people over time ask different questions about where you'd put an oil pressure gauge. A lot of times you would either put a split off here where you'd put a T fitting or a fitting that allows more than one sensor to be fitted. And you could potentially run it there, or if there are other ports on your particular setup, that's an option for you to run an oil pressure gauge. But it's always going to be in this general vicinity on most VW and Audis, which would be right around the oil filter housing. So we're going to thread in this union, and this is so that we can put this adapter, which will give the ability to run a oil cooler setup, and this also has a remote oil filter mount. All right, now we're going to be getting ready to install our intercooler. This is a intercooler from Integrated. This has FDS. FDS is a pretty cool design. Basically, it has end tanks that are designed to have direct the air to ensure that the charge actually runs through the entire core of the intercooler, as opposed to just the path of least resistance, which from all the stuff they've talked about in their testing shows that kind of the lower half of the intercooler is what gets the most airflow, because again, it's going to follow the path of least resistance. So those vanes actually direct the air to make sure that the upper side of the core actually is getting flow. This setup already has an aluminum radiator. This is kind of a custom setup to make it all work together. And we have our fan shroud and fans all mounted in place. So this setup is already bolted together and ready to go into our core support. And these clips here just transfer over from our factory intercooler to this one to mount our setup to the core support. All right, so to do this, we're just gonna drop this whole support into our core support, and we're gonna do so by getting the bottom tabs kind of mounted in place first. All right, so we have our core support set in place. One note I wanted to make, since this car is not running AC, there is no condenser in this setup. Normally that would go in front of the intercooler, but again, because this car is not running AC, we are going to not have the condenser in the vehicle. All right, now we're going to get this core support in place, and just gotta line it up and then get some bolts threaded in. Now we're gonna tighten up these Torx screws that are on the top of the radiator support. So we got our radiator support intercooler all set in place. The next thing we're going to have to do on this build is actually going to be to fabricate our intercooler piping, our radiator piping, as well as our turbo feed and return lines for this. Because of some of the heavy fab work that's coming up, we're not going to be able to release weekly videos on this project anymore. We're going to try to get updates as quick as we possibly can and make sure we put them out as fast as we possibly can. We have a few other things that we might be able to touch on in between that time, but look for that stuff coming up soon, because of the holidays again and the heavy fab work. It could create scenarios where some of the episodes are a little bit further gapped in between. Thank you so much for watching episode 7 of our Project Mark V build. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it. Well, there was a slide hammer action in which my skin got caught between the bolt and the washer. I'm not sure what adjective describes it best, but it feels like slide hammer is a good one.